It is 3 minutes after 10 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We begin with some sad news that you may well have heard already, but which reached me yesterday afternoon when my phone exploded. And obviously, being something of a Twitter addict, I don't have notifications for Twitter on, but my texts and emails started pinging like it was going out of fashion because it was reported that the actor Ray Liotta had passed away, had died in his sleep while filming, I think in the Caribbean. And because he had become such a bizarre and integral part of this programme, particularly, well, obviously during Mystery Hour on Thursdays, but also the rest of the time, we sometimes forget that you can win a Ray Liotta when your qualifications for contributing to a conversation that we have are just astonishingly good. I understood why everyone thought that we sort of felt a personal loss, even though we never met him. It was Steve Allen that met him, my colleague on Early Mornings, my friend and colleague on Early Mornings at LBC. And when you're interviewing somebody famous, there's nothing worse than having to ask for a little favour. I've done it probably 3 times in my life, apart from signing an autograph. That's fine, but I got Daniel Radcliffe in the pomp of Harry Potter to record a little message for my daughters when they were addicted to Harry Potter, and that was very special. But normally you don't like doing it, partly because it feels unprofessional and partly because you don't want to annoy the talent, as we call them. And so I was so touched when Steve actually did it, because we developed a motto on the programme: if you build it, they will come, which is an adaptation of a line in Field of Dreams, the Kevin Costner film, in which obviously Ray Liotta delivered the original version of that line: if you build it, he will come. And I'd started using it as a slightly boastful catchphrase on the programme, because we were beginning to realise that the quality of the callers we were getting was ridiculously high. You know, the days of just having sort of barely sentient people ringing in to talk about how much they hate foreigners were so far in the rearview mirror on this show that we started really noting it and mentioning it, and that became our sort of weird little catchphrase. And so when I heard that Ray Liotta was coming in to be interviewed by Steve Allen, I just asked Steve if he'd just consider asking him to record it especially for us. And apparently with utter charm and kindness and generosity, he did. And reading a lot of the memories of people who worked with him on a rather bigger scale than just asking a colleague to record a silly little stab for a weird feature on a weird radio programme that he'd never heard of. All of the memories and commemorations reflect upon what a stand-up guy he was and what a pleasure he was to work with. So I'm minded at the moment not to retire the stab. I think I want to keep it because we love it and we love him. So rest in peace, Ray Liotta.
I'm Ray Liotta, and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. If you build it, they will come.
Indeed they will. 7 minutes after 10 is the time. And now we go into the programme proper. And I've got a bunch of questions I could ask you today. The first is, why do I get it? Why does Rishi Sunak get it? I know that he has mentioned that people who don't need it or who really don't want it, I suppose, can give it to charity. And to his credit, he's encouraged them to do so. I've lost count of how many homes Rishi Sunak himself has, but the average MP, as a lot of you have already pointed out on social media this morning, the average MP is going to be immediately entitled to 2 payouts. That's 800 quid. Even the fellow that thinks you only need to have cookery lessons in order to be able to feed yourself on 30p a day, or the fellow who thinks that if you're struggling to feed your family, it's because you haven't found out about value food ranges in supermarkets yet, or the woman who thinks that if you are struggling a bit financially, then obviously all you need to do is ask for a pay rise, you stupid peasant, or indeed just work more hours, you thick pleb. That would be her attitude to it. They get an 800 quid sweetener on this one, as far as I understand it. And of course, so I mean, how many does the Queen qualify for? I mean, how many of her homes are owned by the state as opposed to owned by the actual individual? Well, she's got to be looking good for 3 or 400 quid checks fluttering through the letterbox sometime soon. And I don't understand that. But it may well be logistic. That's question number one. Why is Rishi Sunak entitled to it? He's worth £730 million. 0345 6060 973. Maybe it's easier to do it that way. Maybe it's impossible to properly measure it. But the second question is just fascinating to me, and I really want you to ring in on this, and I want you to ring in whatever your politics. I'm toying with the idea of asking what conservatism is, because some of the politicians queuing up today to complain about what Rishi Sunak has done. Obviously, Labour politicians are complaining that he didn't do it sooner, and that even 10 days ago he was patronising, I think, Rachel Reeves about why it was perfectly simple that we couldn't possibly do this because, I'll get you the exact quote, we couldn't possibly do this because it would stop energy companies from investing in this country. Fast forward less than a fortnight, and he's announcing a windfall tax in the House of Commons, but rather pathetically and perhaps even patronisingly pretending that it's not actually a windfall tax. It's a something temporary, something thingy, profit, energy, profit, levy, thingamy, but definitely not a windfall tax. It's like Faulty Towers, isn't it? Don't mention the windfall tax. And Wes Streeting's on the other side of that house going, oh, well, you started it. Don't mention the windfall tax. But it is a windfall tax. If it walks like a windfall tax and talks like a windfall tax, it is a blooming windfall tax. But look, here you have somebody, a cabinet minister telling the Times this morning, the politics of this is just so bad. Well, this is a cabinet minister, a Conservative cabinet minister. We voted against it. We marched the whole party up the hill. That's a reference to the fact they were whipped to vote against it about 10 days ago, certainly less than a fortnight ago. And now we're taking them back down again. It looks like we're being dictated to by Labour. Well, it doesn't just look like you're being dictated to by Labour. You are being dictated to by Labour, which is perhaps why some of them are so cross, including a chap called Richard Drax, who is estimated to be worth about 150 million quid, and that is a fortune that his family built largely upon the slave trade. It's one of the few fortunes still in existence that can be traced pretty much entirely back to that era. To give him his full name, Richard Grosvenor Plunkett Ernle Earl Drax, with, hang on, wait for it, 1, 2, 3 hyphens, no fewer than 3 hyphens. This is a sitting Conservative MP. He says, throwing red meat to socialists by raising taxes on businesses and telling them where to invest their money is not the Conservative way of encouraging those who create our prosperity and jobs. By setting this bar, we are in danger of allowing the socialists to raise it. You just sort of find yourself thinking that every time a Conservative MP has gone as low as you could possibly go in the context of the cost of living crisis, along comes another one to go even lower. It's like you start with George Eustice and his value brands comments, and then you move on to, I've got a mental block on her name, is it Helen McLean? Rachel McLean and her comments about, oh, just get yourself a pay rise or work extra hours. And then you go on to the bloke from Ashington, Lee Anderson, and his comments about, well, if you're struggling to feed your family, you just need to have some cookery lessons. And then you've got a bloke with 150 million quid in the tank, absolutely fuming about the fact that the government has decided to give 400 quid to the poorest, well, a little bit more than 400 quid, a lot more than 400 quid to the poorest families in the country. But the government has decided to redistribute wealth from stinking rich energy companies to people who are struggling to heat their homes and feed their families. I don't know, I honestly don't know where these people, what's the phrase I'm looking for? I don't know how they sleep at night. It's just a bit lazy. But what a stupid phrase from Richard Grosvenor Plunkett Ernle Earl Drax. Throwing red meat to socialists by raising taxes on businesses and telling them where to invest their money is not the Conservative way of encouraging those who create our prosperity and jobs. So please, won't somebody think of the plutocrats? Won't somebody think of the billionaires? All this talk about people who can't eat and people who can't heat their homes. Thank God for Richard Grosvenor Plunkett Ernle Earl Drax and his absolutely crucial concern for the plight of massive shareholders and supremely rich people like him. By setting the bar, we are in danger of allowing the socialists to raise it. Incredible, isn't it? These people who are born 3-0 up and think they've scored a hat-trick. 13 minutes after 10 is the time. I should give you some questions to ask. I haven't even talked about the astonishing collapse of Rishi Sunak. There's a footage of him when I came into the studio today, filling up that car that wasn't his on budget day. How's there ever been a political unravelling as quick and as complete as Rishi Sunak's? I wonder whether he was taking advice from Gerald Ratner on reputation management. That is perhaps one for the older listeners, judging by the blank faces looking back at me in my own production studio. Google him. And the idea that he was the leader in waiting is perhaps crucial to where we are now. because I cannot believe that they have changed their minds in a fortnight. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need to tell me why you think they've done it. And I know some of the answers are obvious, but that doesn't matter. Sometimes the obvious is the truth, and the truth is all that matters. So why have they done it? 2 weeks ago, they marched their members through the lobby to vote against a windfall tax. They whipped them. It was arguably bad optics. Keir Starmer stood up in the House of Commons and said it will happen. He literally appealed to backbench Conservative MPs and said, listen, it's going to happen. You may as well vote for it now, or words to that effect. Rishi Sunak was absolutely adamant. He was indeed, to coin a phrase, arrogantly adamant. He was arrogantly adamant about the fact that it was a stupid idea because it would put big businesses off investing in their own infrastructure and their own growth, despite the fact that I think it was the head of BP who had said, actually, in our case, that's certainly not true. So I'm interested in the ideology of it. I mean, what is conservatism, according to Richard Thingamy-Thingamy-Thingamy-Drax? What is it? What are these values to which these incredibly rich people who seem to be dedicated to protecting the interests of incredibly rich people subscribe? And why do people who aren't incredibly rich think that they're somehow on the same team and voting for them? But we'll move on to that. We'll start with this. Why have they done it? Why in the space of 2 weeks do you, ideally as a Conservative voter, whatever that means, 0345 6060 973, why do you think your government, the government you voted for, has in the space of a fortnight completely abandoned a policy they described in the most corrosive of terms and embraced it on a scale that has infuriated much of their own membership right up until the Cabinet? And I'll take any answer you've got on this, okay? 0345 6060 973. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. He has a vast estate in Dorset and a place called Drax Hall in Barbados, which were both bought by his slaver ancestors. His fortune is one of the largest slavery fortunes still intact and increasing in Britain today. And he's got a problem with the windfall tax. He's got a problem with you getting a windfall. A bloke who inherited millions of pounds raised upon the back of the slavery holocaust has got a problem with you getting a windfall to pay for your energy bills. I mean, it is incredible, isn't it? But he talks about the Conservative way, Richard Grosvenor Plunkett, Earl Drax, all inherited as far as I can tell. He talks about the Conservative way of encouraging those who create our prosperity and jobs. So we may ask a little later this hour, what do you think the Conservative way is as espoused by Richard Grosvenor Plunkett, Earl Drax? I'd love to know. And remember, don't get cross with me if you're listening to this and thinking, oh, rats, he's making me feel stupid for supporting these people. Stop tugging the forelock. Stop doffing the cap. Ask yourself how you've been conditioned to think that he's somehow better than you and deserves all of that stuff while you're sitting there in your bathrobe getting angry with a bloke on the radio. All right? Just stop. You don't have to be that person. You don't have to be their, I don't know what you'd call them really, their sort of bovine supporters club. 20 minutes after 10 is the time. Jonty's in St John's Wood. Jonty, what's going on?
Hi, James. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
I love that. I love that idiom. Build it and they will come. Brilliant. Love it.
Very moving, isn't it, in the context of yesterday's events?
But I could listen to that time and time again.
Amazing voice. What made you pick up the phone?
Yeah, first I just want to declare my interest in that. I'm a natural Conservative who will never actually vote. I've made a vow never to vote Conservative again. Okay. So that will put into context what I'm about to say. I actually think this government seems to have a tendency to either play disasters or absolutely kicking it out the park, and I think this one they've really succeeded on. For two reasons.
To support that, I should just read out a text from Mike who says, I don't care why they've done it, James. I'm just glad that they have. So obviously It's going to come as good news to a huge number of people. But I'm possibly letting the perfect be the enemy of the good this morning.
Exactly. And I really want to put into the bin this argument about, I was hearing this morning Nick Ferrari talking about the footballer who's getting. I mean, you can always cite these anomalies. The point is, if you go non-means tested, and don't forget, Sunak's been criticised big time for for allowing a lot of money to go to the wrong places, for fraud, for overspending, etc. So I think it's quite brave of him to go non-means tested. And the reason why he's done it, and I was very surprised to listen to him, and he actually didn't give this reason, but I'm sure it's the Treasury reason or the logical reason, is that if you go means tested, you create more bureaucracy, it's more costly, but more importantly, you're more likely to find people who really need it can't get it.
Yes.
Because it's going to be generally digitally based. Older people aren't always as au fait with the internet as younger people. It's going to be a headache. It's going to cause more stress to people to get it.
If you had to apply, then it would not reach the parts that they're most in need of being reached. And
quickly, and take away that anxiety.
I think you're probably right.
Yeah. And I think that was sensible, practical, and compassionate of him to do that. Whether he did it for the reasons I'm saying, I don't know.
Well, then I need to ask you why the whole party was whipped to vote against it on ideological grounds just 2 weeks ago, because it seems unlikely that the ideology has changed in a fortnight and the economic situation hasn't changed much either.
Agreed. So before I answer that question, I just want to answer a slightly different question or make an observation.
Excuse me, you're not an MP. That's not allowed.
No, but unlike an MP, I will actually answer your question.
Okay, go on then.
It won't matter a fig that he's stealing Labour's clothes. It won't matter a fig that they've been inconsistent. People don't remember that. They're not you, James. They're not. They haven't got their heads stuck in books, interviews, newspapers all day, right? So they're just getting little surface tidbits of most of the people who vote are getting. You know how a stone can skim across a pond when you're throwing the stone. That's what they're getting. They're getting little noises here and there. They're not going to care that 2 weeks ago they voted the other way. They're just going to say, either thank God I've got the money, or thank God, if I'm a compassionate person, that people who need the money are going to get the money. They're not going to care how they got there. They just care that they got there. So I don't think it will matter. To answer your question why they did it, I think it was two reasons. I think the tactical timing was definitely linked to the miasma that Johnson is in right now. And so to launch this initiative on the day after the Grey report is self-evidently distraction.
And it's worked in that sense. We're talking about it. Yeah. We probably would have been talking about the Abbot party, not the one I went to last night in East London, but the one that they had in Downing Street on the day Dominic Cummings got handed his sandwiches in a roadmap. So it's worked in that sense. It's very expensive. It's a very expensive distraction tactic.
No, but that's why I used the word tactical. That's the tactical reason. The strategic reason is they had no choice. I mean, if you look at the economics of this, the financial domestic economics for a pensioner or for somebody who's on 15,000 or less, or on UC, universal credit as their only source of income, I mean, you're just talking about people who. It's just going to be a disaster. I mean, you're going to get deaths. It's
not quite the no-brainer. I spoke to Jim O'Neill earlier. Now, of course, Lord O'Neill, former head honcho or big cheese at Goldman Sachs, and then subsequently a minister in the Conservative government, although he's a crossbench peer now, as he reminded me in the interview you'll hear later. He doesn't see it as quite the no-brainer that you do. But that's probably a purely economic response rather than a political one. Politically, it became inevitable probably a month ago, or certainly last week earlier this week with the announcement that the cap was going up. The problem is, of course, that the cost of living crisis isn't going anywhere, and whether or not there needs to be another huge boost like this in the autumn is the next big question.
But don't forget, in economic terms, I mean, I don't know if we've got used to these big amounts of money being broadcast over the media, during COVID, but this isn't a huge amount of money. I mean, you're talking about finding a net of 10 billion after the windfall tax. Oh, by the way, I found that really embarrassing watching Sunak try and call it not a windfall tax.
Well, that was genuine. You hear a lot of laughter in the House of Commons, but it very rarely sounds quite as genuine and as sincere as that. It's usually a bit performative. It's like a form of heckling. But that was just like as soon as he came out with the phrase.
When politicians lie like that, because I think it's a form of Orwellian lying, they actually kick themselves in the foot. They shoot themselves in the foot, because his investment inducement policy was actually really smart, but it got lost within the. That's
the tapering, the tapering effect of the relationship between investment and taxation. Jonty, thank you. There's a slight, if you'd allow me, slight contradiction in that. Well, no, there isn't actually. When you talk about him shooting himself in the foot, you're talking about something very different. So, I think you're right, but I think you delivered it a little bit too casually. The idea that people won't care or won't notice that this is stealing Labour's clothes. I get troubled by the idea of political decisions being made partly on the basis that people won't care or won't notice the actual truth of the situation. Although I can't dispute your calculations. I don't think many people will, Kate. They're just going to be told for the next God knows how many months, we gave you £400. Don't mention it was your own money in the first place, or that we had to take it off energy companies who would not be allowed to make profits like this in many other countries, or indeed which would be nationalised in even other European countries. It will just be added to that litany of half-truths and embellishments that it says you can thank it, the Boris boost or something like that. They'll probably start, oh no, I said it out loud now. They'll probably nick it. Thank you, Jonty. Liz is in Cricklade. I should mention the phone lines are open. 0345 60 60973 is the number you need. Why has he done it now? And I should have asked Jonty this because of what he said about his own voting. But according to this Conservative MP with the multi-million pound inherited fortune, it's not the Conservative way to provide a windfall to people like you. So what do you think somebody like that considers the Conservative way to be? 0345 60 60973. Liz, what would you like to say?
Good morning,
Hello,
James.
Liz.
Well, I'd like to start by saying this is all about saving, well, as he likes to call himself, Big Dog. I prefer to call him big hyena.
Thank goodness for that. I thought you were going somewhere completely unacceptable at 27 minutes after 10 on a Friday morning.
And I think you've got to go back to the pandemic. And, the fact that he's self-proclaimed, he loves the mayor in Jaws. He doesn't ever think about economics. If he did, he would never have backed Brexit.
Yes, true.
And he wanted to keep the beach open, and he got himself in a lot of trouble then with herd immunity, and then a late lockdown, and then we had the Cummings scandal. And what saved Big Dog then was the vaccine ban. Yes. And I think that he's seen this, and everything since Partygate broke and he's redone the team has been about saving the big hyena. So I think what they've done is think, well, what can we do to relieve the pain? Because it's pain relief that makes people love Johnson again. And I think that is really all it's about, is about trying to save his popularity again. And that's all they've done, actually, since they got into office.
We'll never know.
It's not governing.
No, I mean, that's a great point, actually. That underpins the other question I'm asking about what they actually stand for now. Because you've got the cabinet ministers briefing the Times that this is not what we stand for. You've got backbench MPs complaining about it on the grounds that this is not even Conservative, never mind the right or the wrong thing to do.
He's a quintessential wolf in sheep's clothing, and he will literally, a chameleon will move to any agenda which is popular, which is why he goes into the green agenda, he goes into the socialist agenda, anything to cling on to power. That's all he cares about. But ultimately, his instincts as, a Bullingdon boy is really with people like Richard Drax, which is interesting. But he knows that they're very much a minority, so he wants to be seen as going against them as well. It probably buys into the red wall seats. So I'm sure that it's all been carefully game planned.
Trying to be all things to all people is what I'm hearing you say, and I'd not quite thought of it like that, because I always think of all of the people that are disgusted, like you, and largely like me, disgusted and outraged by his conduct. But if you're seeking to explain it, and if I marry your call to Jonty's and that sad but true reflection upon the fact that huge numbers of people don't notice, or they've got better things to do. They've got bigger fish to fry than digging into the fine detail of the latest policy announcement or whether or not they've stolen Labour's clothes. This is just a sort of it's a PR exercise, and Sunak has no case but to go along with it, because he's becoming the highest taxing Chancellor in living memory, while giving speeches all the time claiming that he wants to lower taxes and he doesn't want to be a tax-raising Chancellor. It is getting quite surreal, isn't it? The idea that they're doing the polar opposite of everything they claim they stand for.
Well, it is, but also their voter base is generally much older, and that's their audience they're trying to keep happy and brought in, because they're relying on them in the ballot box. And, of course, we've got two critical by-elections coming up, and that will really be the response. So they're trying to make it look as if it ended with Sue Gray. It didn't. It began with the Sue Gray report, the opinion polls, and then two really essential by-elections. And that will decide his fate, I think.
Well, how many times have we said that before? That'll be the acid test. That could be the end of the road. But his ability to kick a can so far down the road that by the time you actually have to pick it up, it's barely recognisable humble as a can is legion. It is 10:31. Thank you, Liz. 2 questions on the board then. Why has he done this? Why have they done this now? 0345 6060 973. And if you want to have a swing at the big one, looking at all the Conservatives complaining about this policy because it's not conservative, I mean, is it that simple that taking money off companies that can easily afford it and giving it to people who can't afford to heat their homes, that is the polar opposite of everything they stand for? In which case, I'd have to ask, why on earth do you vote for them? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Dominic Ellis is here now with your headlines. Joining me now is Jim, now Lord O'Neill, the economist, of course, responsible for coming up with the acronym BRICS, but better known as a former chairman of Goldman Sachs Asset Management and indeed a former Conservative government minister. Before we get on to this rather wizard wheeze about what people who don't believe they need a 400 quid bonus might possibly do with it instead, Lord O'Neill, I wonder what you think about the scheme in general, and particularly the fact that if I had 10 homes, I'd be entitled to a £4,000 windfall today.
Can I just point out that I am a crossbencher and independent of any political party, even though I was a minister in that government for an extensive 17 months.
Of course you can. You have now.
Listen, I think it's got politics sort of written all over it, really, given both because of the circumstances and because of the remarkably complex flavour of the current Conservative administration. It's sort of wants to please all, and from the general reaction this morning, I think it's doesn't seem to have pleased its historic constituent base, although it's caught the mood of the times where a problem happens and the government's seen as a magic money tree, I suppose.
Are you suggesting that the abandonment of the opposition to the windfall tax from all of 10 days ago has nothing to do with number crunching on the Chancellor's part, and rather more to do with the scandals that have been dominating the news agenda all week?
I mean, that I'm sure the timing of it is something that they thought might be helpful, let's say, but I meant actually slightly more broadly, and this Chancellor, the way things are going, is going to be remembered as the guy that just kept coming up with stuff that he didn't really want to do. Partly because of the external shocks that have happened, but partly because of the peculiar position that his government is in power for, and obviously with the so-called red wall seats especially. As
you understand it, is just to focus on this £400 that many people, quite possibly yourself included, Lord O'Neill, will be a little bit baffled as to why they have been given it. Do you see any reason why it was necessary to construct the policy in this way?
First of all, I do think the scale of the price shock with food and particularly energy bills is of such magnitude that a lot of, pretty reasonably well-off income earners are going to notice the scale of it, or if they haven't already. So, in that sense, it is a pretty huge economic shock to everyone, except the absolute most wealthy.
For example, the Chancellor, who is worth 730 million quid, according to the Sunday Times, and entitled to, more than one £400 payout. I'm just intrigued as to whether there should have been, in the way that the bulk of the aid is tailored to the people who need it most.
It does seem a little bit over the top. And again, as an economist, beyond what most people so far have discussed about it, I'm not sure if it's right to keep giving big macroeconomic stimulus through fiscal policy every time there's a shock, because some would argue, from my profession, that that's what's stoking up the underlying increase in inflation. So you can't you can't, there is no such thing as a free lunch. So it does seem a bit weird that this is being given to everybody.
And he's hinted also at another big macroeconomic shock, possibly in the autumn. Because
his dilemma is that obviously you've done it once, and if we have commodity prices staying so strong and this latest forecast of the regulator is true, then they may have to do it again. So that is partly why I said it.
Would you just briefly, before we talk about the idea that Crowdfunder have come up with to possibly redistribute even more of the wealth that's been released, just put into the context, drawing upon your experience, the scale of this cost of living crisis and the broader economic ramifications?
I mean, I'm in the camp that it is on a parallel with something we last saw in the 70s when I first started studying the murky world of economics, and having been immersed in international economics and finance for the best part of 40 years, it comes on top of what was pretty complicated global picture already, that the UK's is obviously compounded by all sorts of things, including our own Brexit decision. So we are in an extremely complicated economic environment, of which, even for somebody like myself that has spent best part of 40 years studying the minutiae details of all sorts of ridiculous things, I'm not entirely sure how a number of issues are going to eventually fall out, and it partly depends on policy. But at the core of it is we can't really tell yet whether these big price increases are genuinely the start of an era of 1960s, 70s style inflation. But the more fiscal policy is used to rescue any shock on the consumer and people's incomes, the greater that risk remains. So it's very, very complicated.
Do you feel sorry for the Chancellor?
Do I feel sorry for the Chancellor? I mean, I don't envy sitting in his shoes, nor for that matter the members of the Monetary Policy Council that determine interest rates. I'm not sure. Feeling sorry for Rishi or the Chancellor is what I would say, but I don't envy the choices he's having to make.
And finally, the organisation Crowdfunder, who do an awful lot of good, have come up with the idea of helping people give some or all of their £400 to people less fortunate than themselves. This is a rather wizard wheeze, isn't it?
I think it's really cool. When Rob told me about it yesterday, somebody heavily involved in so-called levelling up and obviously the Northern Powerhouse, I tried to persuade him to call it People's Levelling Up. But he got more wisdom from his own mind or somebody else. But I think it's a very neat idea.
Well, the acronym would be PLUM, so he possibly saw that on the horizon.
I hadn't thought of that one. It's good. But I think it's a really cool idea. And I'm sure for well-minded people who do feel as though they didn't need this, it's a great opportunity to help even more those that are in the greatest need, because we are living through a time where the challenges for the lowest income people are really quite remarkable. So I think it's a great initiative.
Indeed, with the money going to at least 4 charities, Turn to Us, the Trust, Fair Share and the National Energy Action. Rob, of course, being Rob Love, the Chief Executive and founder of Crowdfunder. Finally, Lord O'Neill, what would you be looking for on the horizon now as early signs of whether the announcement yesterday is working, or whether it is, as you've suggested, causing up more problems for the future?
So I guess we'll have to see the anecdotes about people's spending habits. In the past couple of months, we already saw some signs of a significant impact of this, was people just not being able to spend as much on a whole variety of consumer goods. And that's obviously the immediate sign. But the link to the tone of what I was saying, I think we want to watch actual inflation signals coming out, but more importantly, surveys of people's own inflation expectations, because what we really don't want is that getting embedded in people starting to believe that inflation's going up forever, and so they act on that basis and cause it to definitely 100% guaranteed go up forever, and then you get into a very murky world where the central bank will have to just keep rising interest rates even as the economy slows. So we'll wait and see. You never know. There might be some fluke luck with a sudden reversal of global energy prices, and they all come shooting down, and the opposite happens, which I wouldn't entirely dismiss either as being possible. But we've got a challenging few months coming up here. That's for sure. It seems to me.
Lord O'Neill, famously, of course, a crossbench peer since 2017. Many thanks indeed.
All right, thanks for having me on. Take care.
And you can find out a little bit more about that Donate the Rebate scheme at Crowdfunder. I've tweeted the relevant links from my Twitter account at Mr. James OB, or just search under the hashtag Donate the Rebate. It is 10:45. It's 10:48. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. That was quite an interesting interview, wasn't it? It came about quite quickly yesterday when I was at the podcast show. I got a text off a pal of mine a new pal of mine who set up Crowdfunder, telling me he was doing this thing, and Jim O'Neill was on board, and would we be able to talk to him today? And I thought it was a really interesting response. I didn't know that the 10 o'clock news at the top of the show would include Rishi Sunak also suggesting that those of us who don't necessarily need 400 quid or all of it might donate it to charities that will help with the redistribution of wealth. I'm a little troubled by a Chancellor of the Exchequer saying that. I mean, I think that old quote about charity may have been apocryphal, the one about, but really it's you just need everyone to pay their taxes, mate. You just need to get rid of non-doms for a start, to stop people who are worth a tiny fraction of what most non-dom taxpayers are worth from giving money to charity in order to help the least fortunate or the less fortunate. But hey-ho. You can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and that is the economy we currently live in. A couple more calls, a few more calls, hopefully 2 or 3, time allowing, on the question of, A, what's going on? Why have they done it now? Just make sense of it, especially as a supporter, from a really adamant rejection of a windfall tax less than a fortnight ago, on the grounds that it's very simple. Those Sunak's words, it's very simple. And then I can't remember the words completely, something along the lines of, you can't do that because firms won't invest. It's an incredible abandonment of a previously held position. And usually if a previously held position is being abandoned, it takes a little bit longer than a fortnight for the abandonment to kick in. So why have they done it? And secondly, of course, when you read Conservative MPs like this Richard Drax fella talking about the horrors of raising taxes on businesses, telling them where to invest their money. He describes it as not this is a chap who, as I've said, his inherited fortune comes in large part from slavery, and I believe he still owns a large former plantation in Barbados. But he believes that he's a great standard bearer for entrepreneurial flair, I presume, and the creation of prosperity and jobs. It's not the Conservative way. So what is the Conservative way that politicians like Richard Drax, or, of course, to give him his proper moniker, Richard Grosvenor Plunkett Ernle Earl Drax, refer to? I've been doing this for nearly 20 years, and I'm still not entirely sure. I think because I don't want to believe the bleakest answers to that question are actually true, because what a mockery that would make of our entire society. Phil's in Broadstairs. Phil, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Phil.
Am I allowed to say that we should note the passing of Ray Liotta?
Right, you missed the top of the show, Phil.
I'm
but
so sorry.
That's quite. That's all right. That's
I came in about
forgivable.
1:15.
That's absolutely
anyway.
fine. But that's a nice thought as well. Carry on.
Yeah. Anyway, the thing I'm thinking is that it's rather difficult for Johnson to win now unless he can calm down his voter base. Now, the South is going to head for Liberal Democrats. He's got to come out with some sort of, as you've said, Labour clothes to do that. In the North, he's got to make it look like he's dealing with the cost of living crisis, which is hitting people who must, if he wants to keep those seats, he's got to do something.
But this was true. This was true a fortnight ago. So what's changed?
Yes, but I think what's changed is I think he's decided his actual survival. It's a bit like the Night of the Long Knives. He's going to have to deal with the right wing, and the right wing are going to have to go take a hike. I think what he's going to have to do is to reposition the party and go to his base and say, look, this is what we're doing. Drax and Baker. Baker, don't forget, call for him to go.
Yeah, I've got the full list here. I couldn't find it yesterday, but I've got all 22 of them in front of me now. Baker is still on that list of people that want. We're talking about Brexit hard man Steve Baker, of course.
Yes, but you see, he purged the party, the Remainers, so he lost that kind of steadying force, if you like.
Yes,
and he's now left with this nasty, vicious little rump, which is.
That's no way to talk about Mark Francois.
I haven't seen his run recently, or no one else has. I think he's gone AWOL, hasn't he? But yes, so my thinking is that in order to win in the South, and he needs to, and he's got to put a stop to the Liberal Democrat sort of push, he needs to demonstrate that we care. And it all looks very, very good right now because, let's face it, he has batted away the resignation thing, but he's got to quickly build on that, and he's got to get this loony kind of Brextremist wing of his party under control.
I wish you were right.
So you drive him even further to the right.
But you're offering up the opposite analysis of Liz Cricklade, who was very much of the trying to keep all of the people happy all of the time, or trying to appeal to everybody. And that's why I think I disagree with you, because you're right today. But this time next week, when the pressures are different and when the noises off are coming from the other side of the stage, then he'll be desperate to cosy up to the Brextremist wing of the party that has had...
Do you seriously think he can go ahead... Sorry, James. Do you seriously think he can go ahead pumping out this Tory values are, we don't care about the poor? I don't think that's a credible position in this crisis.
It's what gets him through the day. It's not what gets him... It's not what gets him through the next election, Phil. It's what gets him through today. That's all he's ever cared about. So you're right. Your overview is accurate and correct. But I would not be surprised now if Boris Johnson was privately praying for his own Falklands War as a way of reversing his fortunes. He's always bet the house on something coming along that will distract us from the last terrible thing he did and allow him to tell fibs or embellishments about the non-existent achievements that he passes off as magnificent triumphs.
But it will be the war on the home front that will destroy the Tory party, not him managing to save himself through a Falklands War type thing. I'm afraid this crisis is, as Lord Jim O'Neill pointed out, is just of such a magnitude that if they stood back there and did this kind of opportunistic, okay, this week, nothing the next, they're already signalling they can't stop. But because they don't have a strategy, and this is where I'm afraid as a socialist, I think an economic strategy to rebalance the economy long term. They're not interested in doing anything about the fundamentals. They'll keep trying to stick this stuff on the plaster, on the wound. But if he stood there and said, we're going to let Drax have his way, we're going to let the Brextremists have their way, blah, blah, blah. In the long term, the wheels will.
It's impossible to justify. No, that you are absolutely right about. As the cost of living crisis gets worse and probably kicks up another gear when it gets cold again in winter, the idea that they've done absolutely nothing to help is, you would imagine even with this curiously Teflon-coated politician, that would be a form of electoral suicide. And to be clear, and particularly for Jen in Chiswick, who sent me a very thoughtful text. To be clear, I welcome this. I don't want it to be under any illusions about that, but I welcomed it 2 weeks ago when Labour were calling for it. So the question I'm asking is, what's changed for all of those Conservative MPs who voted against it a fortnight ago to suddenly vote for it at the next opportunity, 10:50. But you have to recognise if you want something and the people that have given it to you for the wrong reasons, it's still the thing you wanted in the first place. The right thing for the wrong reasons is better than the wrong thing or no appearance of the right thing for the right reasons. Are you still with me at the back? Chris is in Alton in Hampshire. Chris, what would you like to say?
Well, in the short term, of course, this is about, as you say, about Johnson's immediate survival. But the long-term picture is that neoliberal economics, which isn't really economics at all, it's a political ideology.
This is Richard Drax's. This is the conservative way, according to Richard Drax.
Yeah, the conservative way, in recent years, in the last 30, 40 years, has been about the redistribution of wealth and income away from working people and into the hands of the rentier sector, people like Rishi Sunak, whose income is probably 4 times the annual minimum wage every day, for doing nothing except watching his assets grow. And the the reason it's coming to the end of the road is because we've got to the point where you can't redistribute anymore without causing too much pain to too many people, for even in the first past the post rigged system with the whole of the media behind the billionaires.
Oh, yeah. See, oddly, Chris,
you're going to get difficult.
People listening may not realise this, but you are actually being optimistic.
I am being optimistic.
I know you are.
Well,
I know you are.
I'm being optimistic.
You think they've run out of road? I'm not so sure, mate.
Well, I think they've run out of road if we have any sort of honesty in the system.
Well, yes, but you referred to the media. Don't forget that the Daily Mail did 2 weeks about Keir Starmer's curry and didn't even put Boris Johnson's the Sue Gray report on the front page.
Yeah, well, you contrast the Daily Mail headline when the Sue Gray report came out with what the rest of us are thinking, and I just find it incredible watching the BBC when you've got these panels of journalists and politicians who are all sitting there talking about, whether Johnson believed he was at a party or not, when we can all see, I mean, he wouldn't last 20 seconds in a situation with a jury.
No, you're absolutely right. I think the polling shows that the people that believe him, you can count almost on one hand. I'll just pick you up on one thing. It's not just journalists and politicians that appear on Question Time. It's also the secretly funded denizens of lobby groups masquerading as think tanks and, of course, unemployable actors as well, Chris. So you must get that right. You have to.
Absolutely.
You're out of time.
Okay.
You've done great. I could tell if I didn't pause you there, you'd be off on another wonderful explication of the bigger picture. Speaking of big pictures, when's the last time we talked about immigration on this programme? I mean, it is not what you might call a hardy perennial for our purposes. Occasionally I feel I have to come on and extinguish some fires that have been started in other corners of the British media by the people who have had very successful careers, actually, in politics and the media, to pick up on the last point. Telling you and instructing you and your mum to get absolutely terrified of foreigners or absolutely furious about people coming here hoping to earn a good living and pay taxes and build a good life. And of course, if you can find one exception to that rule, that's proof that they're all rotten. But it's getting very, very interesting now. It's 3 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Here's the thing, all right? I mentioned to you, I think, yesterday that I was wondering when the embers of racist opposition to immigration were going to be, when the bellows would be applied by the usual suspects. I mean, some of them never stop bellowing, do they? Like Farage and a couple of other similarly unpleasant individuals. But I meant more the big beasts of the British media, apart from the poor souls in leaky boats trying to come over here for better lives, fleeing war zones and all manner of other horrors. And of course, if they're not being honest, then the idea would be that you have a full and functional asylum application process, and anybody found not to be seeking asylum honestly or fairly can be returned whence they came. Now, of course, the government's official proposal is to deport everybody who applies, whether they're applying in good faith or not, to Rwanda, potentially. So it's gone completely bonkers. We know that. But what they haven't done yet is start telling you to get cross about the fellow working in the shop over the road, or the lorry driver who is delivering your goods today, or the teachers, the nurses, all of the people that they managed to get us cross with in the run-up to Brexit. The idea that they were coming over here and stealing our jobs, or that we couldn't control our borders, or that our economic problems were being caused by other people from other countries doing other jobs, and that people you'd never met and never would meet were somehow really, really awful, but all the people you had met from Poland or France or Italy or Germany or wherever it may have been, they're all great. I don't mean them, but let's all vote to leave the most successful single market in the history of the world because we don't like mythical foreigners that we've read about in the Daily Mail and been invited to be vile about in the comment section. Actually, the LBC comment section had its moments as well during that period, so I shouldn't single out the Daily Mail for criticism on this occasion. And I just wonder when it's going to kick off again, because it has to. The problem is that 12 years of Tory government, right, And when we had the referendum, we'd had 6 years of Tory government. So weaponising immigration while you're also a client journalist for a Tory government is quite tricky to do, because it will be the Tory government's fault that immigration is so high. So once you've been successfully primed to be furious about immigration being high, or to be terrified about immigration being high, which you shouldn't be, obviously, but, you know, the guns that they bring to bear upon this story when they set their minds to it are enormous. But if it's a Conservative government, particularly one that's been in power for 12 years, then weaponising immigration, unless you're a vile heckler like Farage, if you're actually engaged in politics and interested in issues and the country, as opposed to attention and ego massages, you've got a massive problem. And that's where Brussels was such a gift horse for the Conservative immigration wing, because they could be in charge but claim that they weren't, and blame any numbers of people coming here on Brussels, on unelected bureaucrats, on the failure to control, or the inability to control our borders, which was a blatant lie. A blatant lie, still is. You know, all you have to do is ask a Belgian what their policies look like, or other countries in the European Union who exercise very different immigration policies from ours. So that's, I find fascinating. Because I don't know how they're going to do it. I really don't. It's why they only really talk about the boats, the dinghies. It's why they talk about Rwanda. It's because they know that they need to keep that little, what our earlier caller called that horrible little rump, or whatever the word was. They need to keep that horrible little rump burning, but they don't actually want everybody else to start burning again, because they've been in power for 12 years and we've left the European Union. So if you start getting spooked by immigration figures, who are you going to blame? So the people that usually make the population spooked by immigration figures in order to either distract from the real problems that are being perpetrated in the country, or simply to get a massive electoral boost from a bit of good old-fashioned jingoism stroke xenophobia stroke racism, Brussels was the mother of all gifts for them, because it allowed them to disown responsibility for immigration policies in this country, or to disown responsibility for the mythical, terrible immigrants who want to come here and simultaneously claim all your benefits and steal all your jobs. It's always puzzled me how that one works. But they can't do that now, because we've left the European Union. So to understand the madness of the Rwanda scheme, which the furious, ugly rump will be convinced is a good idea, it's designed to appeal to your racist Uncle Bob and his, well, that's it really. It's just designed to appeal to your racist Uncle Bob. And it works. So I love the idea. Yeah, deport them to Rwanda, that's great. But don't point out that you've spent 20 years pretending that you were in favour of genuine asylum applications, because they're all getting deported to Rwanda as well, potentially under this. So you've given Uncle Bob a win-win situation. He doesn't have to pretend anymore that he is in favour of genuine asylum applications. He just wants them all out. And you can give him the word Rwanda to shout at the television whenever a blackface appears on it, whether they're in the cabinet or whether they've just got off a dinghy in Dover. Send him to Rwanda. That is wonderful. Bob's delighted, but there aren't that many Uncle Bobs left, and they are a dying breed. So when you read today that more than 1 million foreigners were offered visas to live in the UK over the last year, and when you read further that that's the highest figure on record, according to Home Office figures, you begin to wonder where this story is going to go next. And then you look at the real truth about our jobs market. And I would urge you to have a look today at a piece in the Financial Times. I can read it and I don't subscribe, so I think you can get to it without going behind. You can get it as one of your free articles. It's by Chris Giles and it appears under the headline, "Britain Isn't Working. That Should Concern Us All." I'm now so attuned to Boris Johnson's premiership that when he boasts about something, I think that the opposite must almost certainly be true. So he started boasting about the jobs market, claiming correctly that unemployment is at an all-time low. But of course, that is not an unalloyed good. In fact, depending upon other factors, it could be a bad. So unemployment is at a 50-year trough. But the number of people in work or self-employed is 500,000 lower than the pre-pandemic level. That means that there's roughly 900,000 fewer people working today than there were in the Bank of England forecasts, expected to be working in the Bank of England forecast made just before coronavirus struck, which means you could probably argue you take your worst forecast of the economic impact of Brexit, and because there are now 900,000 fewer people working than they expected when they did those forecasts, the forecast should actually be even worse than the worst ones we had prior. So that's like Project Fear squared becoming Project Here. Now, Andrew Bailey at the Bank of England, this is really, really interesting. My job is to make you understand why some mornings, and I hope I can, because this should absolutely fascinate you. The shrinking labour force is the reason why we have price and wage increases, essentially, and that, of course, is why he's having difficulties bringing inflation back down. If you've got fewer workers, the labour market gets tighter and prices will go up and pay demands will be met. So it means you won't be getting a real-term pay increase necessarily because everything that you pay, all the costs have gone up, but you will be, on paper, earning more than you were last year. And what Chris Giles has identified in the Financial Times today is that this is unique to the United Kingdom. It's incredible. The United Kingdom is the only, or has the most persistent post-pandemic drop in employment of any G7 country. And he quotes the director of the Institute for Employment Studies, pointing out that we also perform poorly among the countries that went into the pandemic with a high employment rate. So why have the numbers of people fallen in work when unemployment is so low? And why has the workforce stopped growing? These are two phenomenal questions, phenomenally important questions. You see, Boris Johnson is boasting about low unemployment. But why are there fewer people in the workforce, and why has the workforce stopped growing? That's economic disaster right there on the horizon. The workforce has stopped growing, and the numbers of people in work since 2019 have plummeted despite the fact that unemployment is so low. Now, part of the answer to that is probably going to involve Brexit. And Brexit, of course, is not linked to the fact that more than 1 million foreigners were offered visas directly, because you didn't need a visa if you were coming here under freedom of movement. But I am absolutely baffled by this. I'm truly baffled. And a curious combination of enormously engaged with it on an intellectual level and then a little bit freaked out on an emotional level. Because we have a shrinking workforce. We have a shrunken workforce that is not growing. So if it had shrunk and now was growing post-pandemic, there'd be less cause for concern. If it had got back to roughly where it was before the pandemic, but it wasn't growing, we'd have less cause for concern. But we have a hugely shrunken workforce compared to pre-pandemic levels, and it's not growing, despite the fact that 1 million foreigners have been offered visas to live in the UK. So I make no apologies for not being entirely clear about what I'm going to ask you this hour, because I just, as I've said, find it a curious combination of intellectually fascinating and emotionally quite chilling. But here's the interesting thing. Older professional men, aged between 50 and 70, have just packed it in. So I know loads of people during the pandemic who had a real think about their lives and undertook real changes. And some people moved house, and some people cut their hours. Some people realised working from home was going to change things. I don't know many who really scaled down, not firsthand. I mean, I'm at the bottom end of the 50 to 70 age group. Good God, I'd never really thought of myself as being in the 50 to 70 age group at all. But they are now doing a lot less. Some of them are just hanging up their headphones. Well, obviously that's a metaphor that only applies to radio presenters, and taking it easy. The problem there is that older men with degrees are generally higher paid and therefore significant net contributors to public finances. And then you've got the problem of long-term sick, which again I wasn't aware of, but the problems like long COVID and the NHS waiting lists and the number of particularly women who are on long-term sick and therefore not working has also compounded this problem. So it's causing higher inflation, it's causing lower growth, and that causes worse public finances. In some cases, people can't get out of bed. Long COVID now getting mentioned in the grown-up papers. And some can't be bothered any longer. And some, of course, can't work here because Brexit forces them to get a visa, and they don't want to get a visa. Wow. Do you want to have a crack at this? Because I don't know how you're going to unravel this. It'll give you 4 phenomena, right? Point 1, higher inflation. Point 2, lower growth. Point 3, worse public finances. And point 4, a shrinking labour force. I think somebody somewhere is going to have to stand up soon and say, we need a hell of a lot more immigration and we need it now. And I am absolutely fascinated to know how that's going to go down with all the people who voted in 2016 to impose economic sanctions on ourselves in order to get fewer foreigners in the country, or to get even many foreigners out of the country. It's 16 minutes after 11. The number you need is 0345 6060 Let's start with the simpler questions. I'd love to talk to you if you are in the 50 to 70 age group. Well, listen, have you come out of the pandemic and decided actually you're not going to work as much anymore? You are consciously and deliberately earning less money. Okay? 0345 6060 I'd love to talk to you if you're in that category. All right? You have decided to earn less money. Why? I'd love to know why. And is it reversible or is it permanent? 0345 6060 And then, of course, here's the question. How is this affecting you directly? How is your company coping with the fact that there are fewer people in the workforce than before the pandemic, and the workforce is not growing, and, well, some people don't want to work here anymore because we've made it so much harder for them to do it. And then if you want, and I know I'm asking an awful lot of you, but it's Friday, you can have a rest afterwards, all right? How do the million visas given to foreigners play into the fact that we still have massive holes in our workforce? So just knit it together however you like, all right? 0345 6060 I've given you all the facts. This is not one of those subjects where I can take all the facts, scrumple them all together and somehow turn it into a wonderful aeroplane which I can then fly off into the phones at 1:15. I don't quite understand what's going on. But if you're in this story, I'd like to talk to you. If you think you do understand what's going on, I'd like to talk to you. Or if you just want to have a crack at unravelling some of it, I'd love to talk to you. That number, once again, is 0345 6060 973. It is 21 minutes after 11, excuse me, and it is one of the most interesting articles I've read in a very long time. It's not even that long. It's by Chris Giles in today's FT, and it goes under the headline, Britain isn't working. That should concern us all, to which I'd add, especially when Boris Johnson is trying to turn the employment market into a win, into a plus. Final paragraph here of this article. So there you have it. Britain isn't working, and this is causing higher inflation, lower growth, and worse public finances. Some can't get out of bed, some can't be bothered any longer, and some can't work here because Brexit forces them to get a visa. None of this bodes well. Let's do what we always do and add the lived experience to the expert analysis. Chris is in Brighton. Chris, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, morning, James.
Hello.
I'm one of your can't be bothered anymore.
Good man. Go on. Tell me.
I'm a 57-year-old man.
Yes.
I was a train driver. I worked throughout the whole of the pandemic, as you can imagine, driving trains.
Yes.
And at the end of last year, I was just kind of out going, what am I doing this for? What is it worth it? I looked at it, had a bit of inquiry in that. I had a pension which I've taken very early, which I'm now taking home roughly half or just under half of the amount of money I used to.
Right.
But I've not got the pressure of it anymore. I haven't got the... I hate to say the word responsibility, but I don't have that responsibility anymore.
Well, it's a huge responsibility driving a train. It's why I find the attacks on you and your colleagues whenever industrial action is mooted so disgusting.
Thank you. And I just went, tell the truth, it was one of those things where everybody was there kind of travelling. I was travelling to work, and you had the people which were there kind of not wearing masks, not doing one thing or another, and I just thought, why the hell am I doing all this?
And you cut your cloth accordingly, do you? You can live comfortably on the reduced income, because it could be 30 or 40 years you've got on the track ahead of you, Chris.
Yeah. Well, at the moment, I'm only a couple of months in, and I'm surviving. I look at it and think, if I need to, and in time, I could always go and get a part-time job.
Yeah, for pin money.
Something like that. Yeah, pin money, beer money, as I would call it.
Yes.
But
why
do I need to do all this? And I think the pandemic and looking at people and everything else, I just thought, I've had enough of this. Why do I need to do it anymore?
And you are counted, of course, as available for work for another another 10 years or so, aren't you? So you're part of the numbers. You're part of these people who are workforce but not working. And I can't blame you the way you've described your decision-making process.
Yeah, that's it. I just decided, what is the point of it all? I'm at an age where...
Have you got family? I mean, did you discuss it with them?
No, I'm a single guy.
So you've got no one to answer to then? Why not? Look after Chris.
Just my cat, and he doesn't. I discussed it with the cat, but I never got anything positive from the cat.
Very wise.
No, I just decided, let's go for it.
Now,
One advantage I do have is I don't have a mortgage any longer.
Okay. That's a huge consideration, isn't it? Because that means that you've got that major worry, that key worry taken away from it. Yeah. And also, Chris, of course, you get to spend 3 hours with me every day. It's
one way of looking at it.
Very diplomatic of you, Chris. But I think there's hundreds of thousands of you. Listen, we're talking about gun crime in America in the next hour, and I did this one in the second hour because I thought it might be harder to get responses to it because gun crime is always a fascinating and a popular conversation. But I can tell you now, I must have done something right in the introduction. Gavin is in Chichester. Gavin, what made you pick up the phone?
James, hi.
Hello.
It was very much your question about when you get to 50. And for me, I think there's 2 points. The pandemic, but it also goes back to 2016 after the Brexit referendum. I've always worked in a corporate world,
right?
Highly sort of political, everybody climbing the greasy pool, really, really well paid, and you just focus on you bring your kids up, you have a house, you mortgage, you do all this stuff. 2016, I sort of took the blinkers off. I live in Chichester. It's sort of, I'm a champagne socialist. I'm probably one of only. I think there's only 12 members of our local Labour Party. I've become more politically active, but I sort of found myself really in 2016 that I was more outspoken. I've decided I've had enough really of everybody being greedy for themselves. So 2016 happened. I carried on struggling in that corporate world where everybody's just after themselves.
Yeah.
Everybody's just. And I think when it got to the pandemic, I was in between jobs, and I just sort of thought, I can't go back to that corporate lie, living that whole world. So, fortunately, I moved house, downshifted, mortgage-free. The kids are all doing okay. They're all grown up.
Right.
And I'm 53. I'm now working 1-2 days a week, but doing things I want to do for a lot less money.
Wow.
And I'm a lot happy because I'm not chasing.
I didn't know about this.
I forgot what I'm chasing.
I've got one mate, actually, who I've had this conversation with. He's 56 and he went through his finances with a fine-tooth comb and worked out what he could. About halfway through lockdown, he just thought... And he loves his job. I've got to tell you, he wouldn't say some of the stuff you said about the politics and stuff like that. And he just sort of thought, yeah, I reckon... Well, I know I can do this. And lockdown seemed to focus people's minds. I know it kicked off for you in 2016, but for a lot of people, it was as if lockdown gave you a little glimpse of the road less travelled, didn't it?
Yeah, and it gave you a look at your spreadsheet and go, what pension pot have I got? What am I doing?
Yeah.
And I had a mate who died at 49 of a massive heart attack, and you sit there going, what am I doing? I absolutely hate this. 53. And I actually can do what I want for pin money, for what you call for beer money. I can do what I want now. The kids are all grown up. We've helped them, set them up. And you just sit there going, when I read a job description about maybe going back to the corporate world, it makes me shiver. I feel sick.
Gosh.
When I look at the politics and the wording. And
then you're going to live longer. You're going to live longer and you're going to have a happier life. That sounds, stressful.
Yeah, and I can have my champagne socialist arguments with all my Boris fans. Everybody's a Boris fan down here, and I want to clap them.
Amazing.
Yeah.
There it is. I mean, what would they need to see apart from the puddles of vomit in Downing Street while they weren't allowed to go to funerals in order to see the scales fall from their eyes? But they ain't going to. And I think that's one of those one of those possibly cultural shifts is that you have seen some form of light. It's light that a lot of people, Chris, our first caller, has also seen, working in a different sector, in a different field, but just recognising the possibility for alternatives. And I wonder, not to be unkind or to be too political about it, but I wonder if I'll say the ruling classes, because Gavin mentioned champagne socialism, the ruling classes must be terrified of us thinking we might be able to do things differently. They kind of rely upon us turning these wheels, staying in the hamster wheel and doing it indefinitely, and that perhaps is part of the reason why they're also so spooked by the popularity of working from home, never mind giving up work altogether. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need if you want to join in. I mean, there's so much to this story. Whether or not anyone's prepared to have a crack yet at the question of how the hell are we going to fill all these gaps in the workforce while we are supposedly keen to have fewer foreign people come here, although last year there were over 1 million for the first time on record in receipt of visas. Someone needs to do a comparison on what those numbers compare with the years when European Union members didn't need visas to come here. And actually, you can grab Gavin's phone line, but apart from that, you'll struggle to get through. 0345 6060973 is the number you need if you want to join in this conversation. I've knitted together a story in the Times. More than 1 million foreigners were offered visas to live in the UK over the last year. It's the highest figure on record. And a story in the Financial Times, which essentially concludes Britain isn't working because some people who were working before the pandemic, and that's our first two callers this hour, no longer are, or they're doing nowhere near as much work, and some can't get out of bed. We've got long-term sickness and long COVID and other issues really punching holes in that workforce, and some can't work here because Brexit forces them to get a visa, which means I should mention that this figure here for the number awarded visas includes a significant number of international students. So, I mean, they don't become part of the workforce either. 11:30 is the time. Dominic Ellis is here now with your headlines.